Officer James Thompson walked down the busy street in Manchester with his head held high. He had been a police officer for 3 years now, and he believed he knew everything there was to know about keeping the peace. The cold Tuesday morning air made his breath visible as he patrolled his regular beat near the courthouse district. James took pride in his uniform and his badge. He straightened his shoulders and checked his reflection in a shop window as he passed by. In his mind, he was doing important work, and people should respect him for it. He had worked hard to get this job, and he wanted everyone to know that he was in charge when he was on duty. As he turned the corner near the large courthouse building, James noticed an elderly black woman crossing the street. She was not using the crosswalk that was clearly marked just 20 feet away. Instead, she was walking directly across the middle of the busy road, between two parked cars. James watched as she moved slowly but steadily, her worn brown coat wrapped tightly round her small frame. This was exactly the kind of behavior that James felt he needed to stop. People breaking small laws like jaywalking might think they could break bigger laws too. He had learned in police training that it was important to enforce all laws, no matter how minor they seemed. James quickened his pace and headed straight toward the woman. The elderly woman had just reached the sidewalk when James approached her. She was slightly out of breath from hurrying across the street, and she was adjusting her old leather purse on her shoulder. James could see that her coat was clean, but had been mended in several places. Her grey hair was neatly arranged, and despite her simple clothing, she carried herself with quiet dignity. James puffed out his chest and used his most official voice. "Excuse me, ma'am. You just broke the law by jaywalking across that street. I need to see some identification right now." The woman, Margaret Williams, looked up at James with gentle, kind eyes. There was no anger or fear in her expression, only a sort of patient understanding. She reached into her purse slowly and carefully. "Officer, I'm terribly sorry about that. I was running late for a very important meeting, and I thought I could save some time. Could you perhaps give me just a warning this time?" James felt his pride grow even stronger. He did not like it when people questioned his decisions or tried to negotiate with him. In his opinion, citizens should simply accept whatever punishment he decided to give them. He especially felt irritated when he thought someone was trying to tell him how to do his job. The fact that this elderly woman was asking for a special treatment made him feel that she did not properly respect his authority. "No, ma'am, that's not how this works at all," James said, his voice becoming sharper. "You broke the law, and now you're standing here arguing with me about it. That's not acceptable behavior." Margaret remained completely calm and spoke in a soft, polite voice. "I wasn't arguing with you, officer. I was simply asking for your understanding. I truly am sorry for crossing in the wrong place." Her calm response made James even more irritated. He had expected her to become nervous or apologetic, but instead, she was maintaining her composure and speaking to him as if they were equals. This bothered him greatly because he felt that citizens should show more obvious respect when talking to police officers. James pulled out his citation book with more force than necessary, flipping through the pages loudly. "Well, since you want to argue about it, now you're getting a court summons instead of just a ticket. Maybe having to appear before a judge will teach you some proper respect for the law and for police officers." He began writing the citation with sharp, angry strokes of his pen. As he wrote, he made sure to check the box that would require Margaret to appear in court rather than simply paying a fine. He wanted to make sure this woman learned her lesson about respecting authority. Margaret watched James write the citation without saying another word. When he finished and tore the paper from his book, She accepted it gracefully with both hands. She looked at the ticket briefly, then folded it carefully and placed it in her purse. "Thank you, officer," she said quietly. "I suppose I'll see you in court then." James handed her a copy of the citation and watched as Margaret turned and walked away. She moved with the same quiet dignity she had shown throughout their entire conversation. She did not look back at him or make any gestures of frustration. She simply continued on her way toward the courthouse building. As James watched her disappear into the crowd of people on the sidewalk, he felt a sense of satisfaction. He believed he had handled the situation properly and had shown this woman that police officers deserved respect. He had demonstrated his authority and had made it clear that breaking the law, even in small ways, would have consequences. James put his citation book back in his pocket and continued walking his beat. He had no idea that the elderly woman he had just cited was someone very important in the community. He had no idea that their paths would cross again very soon. Most importantly, he had no idea that this simple encounter on a cold Tuesday morning would completely change his understanding of respect, authority, and what it truly meant to serve his community. The following Thursday morning, James Thompson woke up feeling excellent about his day ahead. He had spent the past 2 days writing a very detailed report about his encounter with the jaywalking woman. In his report, he had described how the elderly woman had been disrespectful and had argued with him when he was simply trying to do his job. He felt proud of how thoroughly he had documented everything that had happened. James put on his P.S.T. uniform and made sure his badge was polished and straight. He wanted to look professional when he appeared in court to testify about the citation he had given. This would be his chance to show the judge that he was a serious officer who enforced the law fairly and firmly. He had been to court many times before for other cases, and he always enjoyed the opportunity to demonstrate his police work to the legal system. When James arrived at the municipal courthouse, he felt confident and relaxed. The building was busy with people coming and going, lawyers carrying briefcases, and other police officers preparing for their own cases. James checked in with the court clerk and found out that his case was scheduled for 10 o'clock in the morning. He had plenty of time to review his notes and prepare his testimony. As James walked into the waiting area outside the courtroom, he immediately spotted the same elderly woman from Tuesday morning. Margaret Williams was sitting quietly on a wooden bench near the large windows. She was wearing a simple but neat black dress and was reading a thick book. Her gray hair was arranged nicely, and she looked calm and peaceful as she turned the pages. When Margaret noticed James entering the waiting area, she looked up from her book and gave him a polite nod. It was the same kind, gentle expression she had shown him on the street. James barely acknowledged her greeting. He simply glanced in her direction for a moment and then looked away. In his mind, she was just another citizen who had broken the law and would now face the consequences of her actions. James found a seat on the opposite side of the waiting area and began chatting with two other police officers who were also there for court cases. Officer Miller was there for a speeding ticket case, and Officer Davis had cited someone for parking illegally. The 3 men began sharing stories about their recent citations and arrests. "You wouldn't believe some of the excuses people come up with," Officer Miller said with a laugh. "This guy I pulled over yesterday tried to tell me he was speeding because his wife was having a baby. But then I found out she wasn't even pregnant." Officer Davis chuckled and added, "The worst ones are the people who try to argue with you right there on the street, like they think they know the law better than we do. Some citizens just don't understand that they need to show proper respect for police officers." James nodded in agreement and felt comfortable sharing his own story. That's exactly what happened with my case today. This elderly woman jaywalked right in front of me. And when I tried to give her a citation, she started questioning my authority and asking for special treatment. Some people just don't understand that the law applies to everyone equally. The three officers continued talking and joking about difficult citizens until it was time for the court session to begin. James felt good about the support from his fellow officers. He was convinced that the judge would see things his way and would appreciate his firm but fair approach to law enforcement. When the bailiff opened the courtroom doors, James and the other people waiting filed inside and took their seats. The courtroom was formal and impressive, with dark wooden benches, high ceilings, and large windows that let in the morning sunlight. James straightened his uniform one more time and reviewed his notes about the jaywalking incident. The bailiff, a tall man in a dark suit, called the courtroom to order. "All rise," he announced in a loud, clear voice. Everyone in the courtroom immediately stood up out of respect for the judge who was about to enter. James stood up straight and tall, feeling ready to present his case professionally. James expected to see Judge Harrison, who usually handled traffic cases on Thursday mornings. He had appeared before Judge Harrison several times before and knew that the judge appreciated thorough police work and detailed reports. James was confident that Judge Harrison would agree with his decision to cite the elderly woman for jaywalking and disrespectful behavior. But then the bailiff made an announcement that changed everything. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Margaret Williams," the bailiff called out in his official voice. James felt as if someone had punched him in the stomach. The blood drained from his face, and his hands began to shake slightly. He watched in complete shock as the same elderly woman he had cited for jaywalking walked through the side door of the courtroom. She was now wearing the black robes of a judge, and her gray hair was ranged beneath a small judicial cap. Margaret Williams walked to the judge's bench with the same quiet dignity she had shown on the street and in the waiting area. She took a seat behind the large wooden desk and looked out at the courtroom. When her eyes met James's eyes, there was no anger or resentment in her expression. Instead, she looked at him with the same gentle, understanding gaze she had shown during their encounter on Tuesday morning. Judge Margaret Williams picked up her gavel and spoke in a clear, professional voice. "Officer Thompson, due to the obvious conflict of interest in this case, I must recuse myself from these proceedings. Judge Harrison will hear your matter instead." As Margaret gathered her robes and prepared to leave the courtroom, James realized that he had made a terrible, embarrassing mistake. The woman he had described as difficult and disrespectful in his report was actually one of the most important and respected people in the entire legal system. Judge Robert Harrison entered the courtroom and took his place behind the bench where Margaret Williams had been sitting just moments before. James Thompson felt as if the entire world was spinning round him. His confident feeling from earlier that morning had completely disappeared, replaced by a sick feeling in his stomach. He could not believe that the elderly woman he had cited for jaywalking was actually a respected judge. Judge Harrison was a middle-aged man with gray hair and glasses who had been working in the court system for many years. He looked at the papers in front of him and then addressed the courtroom in a serious but kind voice. "We are here today to hear the case involving a jaywalking citation issued by Officer Thompson. However, before we begin with the officer's testimony, I understand that several community members would like to speak as character witnesses for Judge Williams." James felt confused about why there would be character witnesses for a simple jaywalking case, but he soon learned that word had spread quickly through the courthouse about what had happened. Many people who knew and respected Margaret Williams had come to court that morning to support her. even though she had not asked them to do so. The first person to speak was Mrs. Elizabeth Davis, an older woman who taught at the local elementary school. She had known Margaret Williams for many years and wanted the court to understand what kind of person she really was. Mrs. Davis stood up from her seat in the gallery and spoke in a clear, strong voice that filled the courtroom. "Your Honor, Judge, Williams has served our community faithfully for 25 years. In all that time, she has helped countless young people turn their lives round when they appeared in her courtroom. She never just punishes people for their mistakes. Instead, she tries to understand why they made those mistakes and helps them find better ways to live their lives. She has always shown fairness and compassion to everyone who enters her courtroom, no matter what they have done or where they come from." James listened to Mrs. Davis with growing amazement. He had never imagined that the woman he had cited could be someone so important and respected in the community. He began to feel ashamed of how he had treated her and how he had described her in his police report. The next person to speak was Mr. Thomas Brown, a social worker who had worked with Margaret Williams on many community projects over the years. Mr. Brown was a tall, thin man who had dedicated his life to helping people who were struggling with poverty, addiction, and other serious problems. He stood up and spoke with obvious admiration for Judge Williams. "Your Honor, I have worked closely with Judge Williams on many cases involving troubled youth and families in crisis. She doesn't just do her job during court hours and then go home. She volunteers at the homeless shelter every single weekend, serving meals and talking with people who have nowhere else to turn. She has personally mentored dozens of at-risk young people, helping them stay in school and avoid getting into trouble with the law. In all the years I have known her, she has never shown prejudice toward anyone, regardless of their race, their background, or their circumstances." As Mr. Brown sat down, James felt his shame growing deeper and deeper. He was beginning to understand that Margaret Williams was not just any elderly woman, but someone who had spent her entire career helping others and making the community a better place for everyone. More people stood up to speak about Judge Williams. A young man named David talked about how she had helped him get his life back on track after he had been arrested for shoplifting when he was a teenager. A woman named Sarah described how Judge Williams had worked with her family when her son had gotten into trouble with drugs. An elderly man named Robert explained how Judge Williams had helped him find housing when he had been homeless for several months. Each person who spoke painted a picture of someone who was wise, kind, and completely dedicated to helping others. James realized that he had not just cited an elderly woman for jaywalking. He had humiliated and disrespected a pillar of the community who had devoted her entire life to justice and helping people in need. When it finally came time for James to give his testimony, he stood up on shaking legs. His voice cracked as he began to speak, and the words he had prepared seemed completely wrong now. In his police report, he had described Margaret Williams as being disrespectful and argumentative, but after hearing all the character witnesses, those words sounded hollow and petty and completely unfair. James struggled to get through his testimony, but his heart was not in it anymore. He could see that Judge Harrison was not impressed with his reasons for issuing the citation. The judge listened patiently, but James could tell that he was questioning whether this case should have been brought to court at all. When James finished his testimony, Judge Harrison made his decision quickly. "Officer Thompson, while jaywalking is indeed against the law, I believe that citations for such minor infractions should be used sparingly and fairly, given the circumstances of this case and the character of the person involved. I am dismissing this case with a warning. However, I encourage you to think carefully about how you interact with all members of our community in the future." After court ended, James waited outside the courthouse building, hoping to speak with Margaret Williams. When she finally emerged from the building, still wearing her judicial robes, James approached her with his head hanging down in shame. "Judge Williams," he said quietly, "I am so very sorry. I had no idea who you were or how much you have done for this community." Margaret Williams looked at James with the same gentle smile she had shown him on the street. "Officer Thompson, who I am shouldn't matter at all. Every person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their position in the community or their appearance. The real question now is, what will you learn from this experience?" Over the following months, James Thompson found that he could not stop thinking about the words that Margaret Williams had spoken to him outside the courthouse. Her gentle question about what he would learn from the experience kept playing over and over in his mind. At first, James tried to push these thoughts away and continue with his regular police work as if nothing had changed. But deep inside, he knew that something very important had shifted in his understanding of himself and his job. James began to examine his own behavior and attitudes in ways he had never done before. He started to notice how he treated different people during his daily patrol work. He realized that he often made quick judgments about people based on how they looked, how they dressed, or how they spoke. He saw that his own prejudice and arrogance had been clouding his judgment for a long time, making him treat some people with less respect than others. This new self-awareness made James feel deeply uncomfortable. He did not like what he was discovering about himself, but he knew that Margaret Williams was right. He needed to learn and grow from this experience instead of just feeling sorry for himself. James decided that he wanted to do something positive to make up for his mistakes and to become a better person. James learned that Margaret Williams often volunteered at the local community center, working with troubled youth and families who were going through difficult times. He decided to start volunteering there as well, hoping to learn more about how to serve his community in meaningful ways. When James first walked into the community center, he felt nervous and uncertain about whether he would be welcome there. The community center was a busy place filled with people of all ages. There were children doing homework at small tables, teenagers playing basketball in the gymnasium, elderly people participating in exercise classes, and families attending various programs and activities. James was struck by how diverse the community was and how everyone seemed to be working together to help each other. James watched Margaret Williams as she moved through the center, talking with different people and helping wherever she was needed. He was amazed to see how she interacted with everyone in exactly the same way, whether she was speaking with a homeless person who had come in from the cold, a successful business owner who was volunteering his time, or a teenager who had gotten into trouble at school. Margaret treated each person with the same level of respect and kindness. Margaret never acted as if she was more important than anyone else. Even though James now knew how respected she was in the community, she listened carefully to what people had to say. She offered help when it was needed, and she treated everyone as if they were valuable and worthy of her attention. James began to understand that this was what real leadership looked like. As the weeks passed, James found himself working more and more often at the community center. He helped serve meals at the soup kitchen. He tutored children with their homework, and he participated in cleanup projects around the neighborhood. Through this volunteer work, James began to see his community in a completely different way than he had before. One evening, while helping serve dinner at the homeless shelter that was connected to the community center, James found himself working directly alongside Margaret Williams. They stood side by side behind the serving counter, ladling soup and serving bread to the long line of people who had come for a hot meal. Margaret worked quietly and efficiently, greeting each person with a warm smile and a kind word. James watched her as she served each person with dignity and respect. He knew that her work was not just about serving, but about helping others. She was a leader who cared deeply about others. She did not just serve her own needs, but also those of others. Gradually, James noticed that Margaret never mentioned their first encounter on the street or what had happened in the courthouse. She did not treat him with any anger or resentment. Instead, she treated him as a valued volunteer who was making an important contribution to the community. This kindness made James feel even more ashamed of how he had behaved toward her. Finally, James could not keep his feelings inside any longer. During a quiet moment between serving meals, he turned to Margaret and spoke in a quiet voice. "Judge Williams, I need to ask you something that has been bothering me for months. How can you be so kind to me after how badly I treated you that day on the street? How can you work alongside me as if nothing happened?" Margaret paused from ladling soup and looked at James thoughtfully. Her kind eyes showed no trace of anger or hurt feelings. Instead, she looked at him with the same gentle understanding she had shown from the very beginning. "James, I learned a long time ago that holding onto anger only hurts the person who is carrying it around. When I met you that day, I saw in you not a bad person, but simply someone who had lost his way. Everyone deserves a chance to grow and become better than they were before." James felt tears beginning to form in his eyes as he listened to Margaret's words. Her forgiveness and understanding meant more to him than he could express. "I don't know how to make up for my behavior that day," he said quietly. "I don't know how to show you how sorry I am or how much I have learned." Margaret smiled warmly and placed a gentle hand on James's shoulder. "You're already doing it, James, by being here, by serving others, by opening your heart to change and growth. That's how we heal our community and make it better for everyone. We do it one person at a time, one act of kindness at a time, one opportunity to help someone else." Through Margaret's example and her patient teaching, James learned that true authority and respect did not come from wearing a badge or a uniform. Instead, it came from earning the trust and admiration of others through service, through treating every human being with dignity, and through using whatever power or influence you had to lift others up rather than to put them down. 6 months had passed since that embarrassing day in the courthouse, and James Thompson had completely transformed the way he approached his job as a police officer. The lessons he had learned from Margaret Williams had changed not only how he treated people during his daily patrol work, but also how he thought about his role in the community. James had become one of the most respected officers in his entire district, and his fellow police officers often came to him for advice about how to handle difficult situations with patience and others. Every morning when James put on his uniform and pinned his badge to his chest, he remembered Margaret's words about treating every person with dignity and respect. He approached every interaction with humility and compassion, whether he was talking to a wealthy business owner who had been caught speeding or a homeless person who was sleeping in a doorway. James had learned that every person had value and deserved to be treated with kindness, regardless of their circumstances or appearance. The change in James's behavior had not gone unnoticed by the people in his community. Citizens who had once avoided talking to police officers now felt comfortable approaching James when they needed help or had concerns about their neighborhood. Parents brought their children to meet him when he walked his beat, and local business owners invited him to stop by their shops for coffee and conversation. James had become a bridge between the police department and the community, helping to build trust and understanding on both sides. James continued to volunteer regularly at the community center and the homeless shelter, often working alongside Margaret Williams and other dedicated volunteers through this service work. He had developed friendships with people from all walks of life and had gained a much deeper understanding of the challenges that many community members faced every day. This experience had made him a more effective and compassionate police officer. The annual Community Appreciation Dinner was held at the largest hotel in the city, And it was always a special event that brought together police officers, firefighters, teachers, social workers, and many other people who served the community in important ways. James attended the dinner every year, but he had never expected to be recognized for anything more than just doing his regular job duties. When the Master of Ceremonies began announcing the awards for outstanding community service, James was shocked to hear his own name called. Officer James Thompson has shown exceptional dedication to serving our community both in his official capacity as a police officer and through his volunteer work with ATAR, youth and homeless individuals. His transformation from a by-the-book officer to a true community servant has inspired both his fellow officers and the citizens he serves. James walked to the stage on unsteady legs, still unable to believe that he was receiving such an honor. As he accepted the beautiful Crystal Award and shook hands with the mayor and other city officials, he looked out into the audience of several hundred people. There, sitting at a table near the front of the room, was Margaret Williams. She was clapping enthusiastically and had a proud, warm smile on her face that reminded James of how his own grandmother used to look at him when he accomplished something important. The sight of Margaret's encouraging smile filled James with a deep sense of gratitude and accomplishment. He knew that without her patient teaching and forgiveness, he would never have become the kind of person who deserved to receive such recognition. In his brief acceptance speech, James thanked the community for giving him the opportunity to serve and mentioned how much he had learned from the many volunteers and community leaders who had taught H in what it really meant to help others. After the formal ceremony ended, people moved round the room to congratulate the award winners and enjoy refreshments together. James was talking with several other police officers when he noticed Margaret Williams approaching him. She had changed from her judicial robes into a beautiful blue dress, and she moved through the crowd with the same quiet dignity that James remembered from their first encounter on the street. "Officer Thompson," Margaret said as she reached him, "I'm so very proud of the man you've become over these past months. You've shown everyone in our community that people really can change and grow when they're willing to examine themselves honestly and work hard to become better. That's given hope to many people who might have given up on the possibility of positive change." James smiled broadly, feeling genuinely grateful for everything that Margaret had taught him. "Judge Williams, I need you to know that you saved me from becoming someone I wouldn't have been proud of. When I think back to how I treated you that day, I'm ashamed of the person I was. But you showed me that grace and forgiveness are much more powerful than anger or punishment could ever be." Margaret nodded warmly and placed her hand gently on James's arm. "That's the true beauty of human connection, James. When we choose to see the best potential in each other, we actually help bring out that goodness. Your journey from that difficult day to this celebration tonight shows everyone that every person deserves a second chance to do better and to make positive contributions to their community." As they continued talking, James realized that he now understood something very important about his role as a police officer. His badge and uniform did not make him superior to anyone else in the community. Instead, they made him a servant of the people, someone whose job was to protect and help others rather than to demonstrate his power over them. Every day, he carried Margaret's lesson deep in his heart. That true strength comes from lifting other people up, not from putting them down or making them feel small. The encounter that had begun with prejudice, arrogance, and misunderstanding had completely transformed into a genuine friendship built on mutual respect and a shared commitment to making their community a better, safer, and more welcoming place for everyone who lived there.